Welcome, everyone, to the Geopolitics Gazette channel. We're jumping right in today with a really significant development, something that's definitely making waves globally. Iran is seriously boosting its air defenses. And the supplier, China, providing some pretty advanced missile systems. Okay, let's try and unpack this. This deep dive is all about the implications, which are frankly quite complex. We're talking Iran's latest acquisitions, yes, but it's not just about the hardware. It signals shifts in global power, maybe the limits of military power, and definitely the huge role of industrial capacity, supply chains, all that in modern geopolitics.
Exactly. And what's fascinating, I think, is how something that seems like just one deal, a missile sale, actually plugs into this much larger geopolitical chessboard. We're going to explore what this means for, say, the U.S. and its goal of global primacy, but also the changing nature of war itself and these evolving ties between China, Russia, and Iran.
Okay, so let's start with Iran's move itself, this strategic defensive shift. We're seeing reports that Iran has started getting these Chinese surface-to-air missile batteries, and this is happening right after that ceasefire deal with Israel. What's really interesting is to talk about Iran trading oil for these systems, trying to rebuild capacity that got hit hard before.
Right, and the timing, as you mentioned, the ceasefire, but also consider the wider context. You had Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu spending quite a bit of time at the White House recently. Lots of reports suggested they were coordinating, maybe discussing another potential strike on Iran. So it raises a really key question. Why this specific focus? Why air defense right now?
That is the crucial question. It tells you a lot about Iran's strategy, I think. It looks like their decision to double down on air defense and ballistic missiles instead of, say, trying to buy lots of fancy warplanes like the Su-35. Well, it's a very realistic strategy, probably effective too. Think about it. It just doesn't make sense for Iran to get, 25, maybe 50 warplanes?
Right.
And expect to challenge 200, 300 U.S. or Israeli jets. You have to factor in the numbers, the training, the experience, the whole infrastructure, the intelligence advantage. It's huge.
Absolutely. Air defense and missiles play more to their asymmetric strengths, and we saw the impact of those strengths, didn't we? During that 12-day conflict, Iranian ballistic missiles caused major havoc. They hit Tel Aviv, Haifa for the first time. But on the flip side, those Israeli F-35s were actively hunting the launchers. That really showed Iran starkly why they need better air defense to protect their own offensive punch.
Yeah, protect the protectors, essentially.
Exactly. And remember, the international arms embargo on Iran, that only lifted back in October 2022. So their ability to build up defenses before that was severely limited. And you might ask, what about Russia? They have great systems, S-300s, S-400s, but right now their absolute priority is Ukraine. That's existential for them.
Which leaves an opening.
Precisely.
What?
A strategic opening for China to step in.
Okay, so Iran makes these calculated moves. Let's zoom out again. What does this whole situation tell us about maybe the foundations of global power? Specifically, America's long-standing position. Are we seeing a real shift? Because for decades, the main U.S. geopolitical goal, let's be frank, has been establishing, maintaining, expanding global primacy. Often through regime change, Iran, Russia, China are often cited as targets or at least containment, political capture.
And what's really striking now is that hitting Iran directly, if that were to happen, marks a shift toward, direct warfare, not just proxies. That potential move, plus this idea floating around Washington of strategic sequencing and division of labor.
Meaning they can't do everything everywhere at once.
Basically, yes. Acknowledging they need to pick their battles, maybe rely on allies more for certain things. It suggests a growing realization, both in D.C. and on Wall Street, about the actual limits of their military, economic, political, diplomatic power, especially as the world becomes more multipolar. They just cannot sustain a three-front war. It's becoming clear.
And speaking of limits, this is where the missile production numbers get, pretty startling. Get this. The U.S. makes around 550 to 600 Patriot interceptors a year. Okay. Now, Russia. They're reportedly producing over 800 Iskander missiles annually. These are the offensive missiles. And the real kicker, experts say you often need at least 2 Patriots, probably more like 3 or 4 in reality, to have a good chance of stopping one Iskander.
The math just doesn't work out.
It doesn't. The U.S. doesn't even have half the missiles needed just for Ukraine right now, never mind stocking up for potential conflicts in the Middle East or Asia Pacific. It really exposes a fundamental vulnerability in industrial capacity for sustained warfare. It's kind of shocking when you dig into it.
And then layer on the cost. It's immense. A single Patriot battery, that's a cool $1 billion. Each interceptor missile, $12 to $13 million. I mean, the numbers add up incredibly fast. Think about the planned U.S. production of THAAD interceptors, another key system, for 2025 was reportedly just 12 units.
12.
Yet Israel apparently fired through more than a year's supply of some interceptors in just those 12 days of conflict. The industrial base, as it's currently configured in the US and much of the West, it simply cannot keep up with that kind of burn rate. It's a massive supply and demand mismatch.
So connecting these dots, what does it reveal about supply chain vulnerabilities? This feels critical.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
And maybe not obvious to everyone, China put export controls on certain rare earth minerals, specifically these samarium cobalt heat-resistant magnets. Tiny things, but absolutely vital for high-tech systems like F-35 jets, other advanced U.S. missiles, especially parts that get incredibly hot.
Right, essential components.
And these controls came after the U.S. chip sanctions on China. So now U.S. companies need licenses to import them, and China can halt those licenses if they think the end use is military.
It's almost ironic. Remember when the U.S. sanctioned Xinjiang cotton?
Vaguely, yes.
And then later, there were complaints about a shortage of gun cotton, which is needed for artillery shells. It's a perfect example of how these complex global supply chains mean sanctions can boomerang. You try to hurt your adversary, but you end up crippling your own vital production. It's a self-inflicted weakness.
It really underscores a fundamental difference in military thinking, too. The U.S. and its allies, including Israel, they tend to favor the quick blitzkrieg, decapitation strikes, get in, get out fast. That doctrine really comes from the Yom Kippur War experience, avoid getting bogged down. Iran, though, everything suggests they're digging in, preparing for a long, drawn-out war of attrition.
And that's a kind of war the U.S. isn't really built for.
Not traditionally, no. The U.S. military-industrial system isn't optimized for it. It's geared for technological superiority, rapid deployment, decisive battles, not the slow grind of attrition that demands massive, sustained manufacturing output and logistics.
So if we pull all these threads together, what's the bottom line for the U.S. system here? It seems the U.S. industrial base, because it's so driven by corporate finance interests, maximizing profit, well, it outsourced huge chunks of production without enough thought, perhaps, for national security resilience. The system is great for quarterly earnings, maybe, but it seems inherently incapable of churning out the sheer volume of weapons needed for multiple prolonged conflicts. It leads to overextension.
Which is a classic pattern for empires throughout history, isn't it? They get overextended, prioritize short-term gains over long-term foundations.
Which brings us neatly to the rise of multipolarism and China's role in all this.
Exactly, because unlike the U.S. struggles we just discussed, China has what some call overcapacity in manufacturing. For them, providing air defense systems to Iran. There's really no supply bottleneck. And when the Chinese Foreign Ministry talks about sharing achievements with friendly countries, many observers see that as, well, pretty clear confirmation these deals are happening.
And it's important to see these sales as more than just, cash and carry deals. These are essentially decade-long relationship-building exercises. You'll have Iranian operators going to China for training. You'll have Chinese technicians in Iran helping with setup, maintenance. It's not just a transaction. It builds deep, long-term connections. Trust.
And there's a key difference in the terms of these deals, too. China's approach is often described as, let's say, unconditional support, fewer strings attached, meaning they likely aren't putting restrictions on Iran using these systems against Israel, for example. That contrasts sharply with U.S. arms sales. They often come with very specific end-user agreements. Like when the U.S. sold F-16s to Pakistan, there was a clause they couldn't be used against India.
So China's more flexible approach helps build alliances.
It certainly seems to further align China, Iran, and Russia, who increasingly see themselves in the same boat.
And just as a fascinating aside, the historical ties here are incredibly deep. The China-Iran relationship isn't new. It goes back millennia. You have examples like the Sasanian dynasty finding refuge with China's Tang dynasty way back in the 600s AD. Even in 14th century Iranian art, you see manuscripts with landscapes painted in a distinctly Chinese style. These connections have ancient roots.
It's a really important historical perspective, and looking at the present, you have China, Russia, Iran, all perceiving themselves as targets in this broader geopolitical contest. So cooperation becomes almost necessary for them. China brings enormous industrial strength and those resilient supply chains we talked about, and that's a critical U.S. vulnerability. Think about it. A single modern jet fighter has something like 350,000 components. Many of those trace back to Asia, often China.
Yeah, it highlights this really stark difference in foreign policy styles we're seeing globally. China often leads with, well, compelling opportunities. Huge infrastructure projects like high-speed rail, trade deals, tourism, economic persuasion, often framed as win-win, whereas the U.S. approach frequently relies more on coercion, political pressure, sanctions, sometimes destabilization efforts. And a lot of countries around the world feel caught in the middle, trying to balance these two powerful but very different forces.
And that brings us back to Iran's resilience. Since 1979, despite unbelievable pressure, sanctions, isolation attempts, they've managed to maintain their self-determination, their sovereignty. And partners like China have been absolutely crucial in that. This ongoing rearmament, this regrouping we're seeing, it's vital preparation for survival against future conflicts. They seem convinced another conflict is coming, and they're methodically getting ready for that war of attrition.
Okay, so quite a journey we've taken there. We've unpacked how Iran bolstering its air defenses with Chinese help isn't just a simple arms deal. It's a major signal in a shifting global order. We've looked at the very real limits facing the U.S., especially in industrial capacity and those fragile supply chains. And we've seen how China's, let's call it, no-strings-attached approach, combined with deep historical ties, is pulling key players like Iran and Russia closer together.
It really leaves us with a crucial question, one for you listening to mull over. As these global power dynamics keep shifting, as the very nature of conflict potentially moves from quick strikes toward these long wars of attrition, what does it actually mean for a nation to be truly resilient, truly sovereign in this emerging multipolar world?
A lot to think about there. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. If you found this discussion insightful, and we hope you did, please do remember to like this video and subscribe to the Geopolitics Gazette channel. We'll bring you more in-depth analyses on the critical issues shaping our world.